Welcome to this episode of the Sneaker Principal Podcast. My name is Utrain Joku, and I want to talk to you. Actually, it's a continued conversation about how we are trained to be silent as educators. I am making a slight pivot from just focusing on educational leaders to just educators in general. And this thing doesn't start in the school building. It doesn't start from district-wide or city-wide or statewide policy. It starts from how we were trained in educational training programs at university level. How many of you have heard this whole notion of be careful so you're not uncover paper? Be careful. It's very important for you to keep your head down and focus on just doing the work. As a first year teacher, second year teacher, until you get experience, until you get your tenure. And when you get your tenure, depending on where you are, you're protected because you have a strong union, or you might not have a strong union. Maybe the job market makes you more valuable because where you are, there aren't a lot of people who want the work that you do. So the thing is, you just kind of start from the beginning, keep your head down. You do what you're asked to do, even if you believe it's hurting kids or it's not most effective or in some cases flat out wrong. I've known many educators who've worked under tyrants, and I don't use the term tyrant loosely. They've worked under, principals, assistant principals, lead teachers, school systems that were just not doing things in the best interest of those we serve, the children, the parents, the community. And they stay quiet because that is how you keep your job. And don't get me wrong, it's very important to keep your job because at the end of the day, you got to pay your bills. You got to take care of your family. You got to you got to make sure that you are financially buoyant. But what happens is it becomes a sort of a habit, something that you become used to. In many cases, you don't even realize that you're doing it. You sit in spaces, professional development, you hear from your leaders, and you kind of sit there quietly, roll your eyes, you take your deep breaths, you huff some puffs, because either you consciously or subconsciously know that what you're hearing, what's being said to you, is incorrect. It doesn't apply. It's a blanket Band-Aid response to real issues in your schools, in your classrooms, in your spaces. But this is not just happening where you are. It's happening across the board. Recently, I sat in a professional development that brought in schools from all over. And in that room were district level leaders, school principals, teacher leaders, and teachers with varying levels of experience, from brand new teachers, mid-career teachers, to veteran teachers. And we sat in a room addressing instructional strategies to move instruction to increase student proficiency. And what was interesting is the fact that the schools were very different across the board. Schools from dense urban locations, schools from rural environments, schools that were racially diverse, and schools that were racially homogenous. Districts with high special education numbers, districts with high English language learners. It was across the board. And even when you looked at the participants of this professional development, we looked very different. We were coming from very different worlds. However, the strategies and the professional development we were given was cookie cutter. you apply this, it's going to work for your school. And I remember looking around and being like, wait a minute. If I, as a teacher, sat in a classroom, not hopefully not sitting, but I'm standing in front of my students. I'm telling all my students, if you do it this way, if you read it this way, if you take the information in this way, you're all going to 100% get it. Negating differentiation, negating learning styles, negating, ability levels, negating context. I'll be told I was being ineffective. How do I know that Pedro understands what I'm asking him to do? How do I know that Marquise or Susan or Tanisha or Maria understands? What makes them different? What makes them the same? How am I scaffolding this for their learning needs? What multiple entry points are there to ensure that I'm being effective in getting them to proficiency? And it's interesting because in this space we were given the do's and do nots in leadership, from school level leadership to central level leadership. And one of the things that stood out to me, and I'm paraphrasing here, is rolling out professional development that was blanket across the board as a do not, that didn't speak to the intricate needs of the audience, the school communities, et cetera, et cetera. And I sat in a room where I was being given this information, this do and do not list, and that's exactly what was happening. I call that lazy teaching, lazy instruction, where you're not willing to go a little bit deeper. Just a little bit deeper. You should be going much deeper, but at minimum, a little bit deeper. Differentiation. You need to say elementary versus middle versus high school. If you need to say, urban versus rural, ENL versus high ENL population versus high special education population, or even a combination of all these things. How do you triage? How do you ensure that everyone is getting what they need? Excuse me. You don't go into a battlefield and say people need medical attention and pull out a hacksaw and start cutting everyone's leg off. You don't. You might say, no, this person needs that. God forbid. But you don't just say everyone. And this is what's happening in most environments. This is what's happening in spaces that we're being told we're being given high quality supports. Now again, we're being given high cost supports. There are people out there who are making a tremendous amount of money in providing what often seems like, deep, well thought out support products. But what's really happening is we're being given enough to kind of band-aid the problem till next time. Going back to how I started this podcast, I said, we're trained to be silent. At what point in time do we start to speak up and say, hey, what you're asking me to do, and within the rules and parameters that you're giving me, don't even apply to this space. You're not even following the rules yourself. It's important that we all question. I tell my teachers all the time, question. Don't just because I said it doesn't mean it's the truth. Just because I said it doesn't mean it didn't make sense. At the end of the day, we get better, I get better when we question, when we ask why, how do we know? What is this supposed to look like? Show me where it's happening so I can go there and learn directly from in the field. Don't just give me set of instructions to implement this with the expectation that following the procedures and implementation with fidelity would yield the results that we're all seeking. We have to go deeper. I've said this before. We're practitioners. We're not just, we're scholars. We're not just practitioners. You walk into a school building, you have years of experience, years of education, years of high level, graduate level education and research. And we're not harnessing that. We're not asking ourselves to come together and really make sense of what we're seeing and creating space for people to ask high level questions. And I'll say it, dumb questions. What people don't realize is that the dumb questions are the highest level questions. But usually those are the questions no one's willing to ask because everyone's fearful of how they'll be looked upon if they ask that question. But usually that dumb question is the question that sets off the wildfire of innovation and excellence. Stop being quiet. Ask the question. Even starting off with why. Why are we doing this? Why is this the right answer? Because if we can answer that question, right or wrong, we know that we're heading in the right direction. All right, y'all. This is Uche and Joe, Acoustic Principal. Till next time.